We are Heather and Paul Christie.
And for over 12 years, we've worked with executives and entrepreneurs to accelerate change in every aspect of their business.
Because we are in the fastest paced business environment that anyone has ever seen before.
So join us for the Evolve to Win show. Hi, and welcome to another Evolve to Win show with Heather and Paul.
How are you doing today?
I'm doing good.
Good. We're talking about millennials today.
Good, because I got a bone to pick with you about millennials.
What's your bone to pick? So what is it that you think is going wrong? What's the mistake that people are making when it comes to managing millennials?
Well, I don't think that it's a mistake necessarily. I just think that this whole generational thing, like dicing all our generations up and saying that we're so much different from each other, that it's just kind of, it doesn't work for me. And I think because I look at even just our generation and some of the things that people complain about with millennials, and I'm like, well, that's how I was.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how you know what? I wanted to sit on a beanbag at work. That would have been nice. I would have loved to play ping pong at work. That would have been awesome.
I agree.
So, I mean, I don't understand where this whole thing of like, just millennials are these, entitled group and they just need everything. I think it's bull. I really do.
All right. So I get that you feel pretty passionate about this.
I feel very passionate about it.
Okay. So I'm going to push back a little bit and say that I think there's value in studying different generations because there are some significant differences, some significant nuances where I think managers in particular are making a big mistake is that when something goes wrong in the workplace, they generalize what's gone wrong and put a generational label on it versus really understanding and dealing with the individual. Yes. And I think that's a mistake that's happening too often. And I think when people make that mistake is because maybe they've learned just too little about the generations and they hear the buzz, that constant buzz. I think entitlement is the word that you used, that it's just out there. I mean, search on millennials and search for descriptions of millennials and you're going to hear that entitlement word all over the place. Now, are there millennials out there who behave in an entitled manner? Absolutely.
And wasn't there people in every generation that felt entitled? I mean, it's
absolutely.
Okay, so maybe they're just saying, well, it's the majority of millennials that act this way. I don't believe that. I believe that, and I think so preparing for this Evolve to Win show, Heather and I were looking at some articles and we pulled up one particular article and we were like, well, this is a pretty good one. Let's go on it. And it was the 4 tips that managers should adopt to relate to millennials. And we were reading through it and I'm reading and I'm going like, why don't we just go through them and then, and then I'll rebut.
Okay. So, and I want to start off by saying, I think this article is spot on. So let's just start off with that as a baseline. The 4 tips that this author, who happens to be a millennial, gives us.
Yes.
I think her tips are spot on.
They are.
And you tell me, audience out there, are they spot on for just millennials? Let's take a look.
Or for every generation. So I want you to think, depending on if you're a millennial or you're a Generation X.
By the way, let's define the generations. Okay. For those who are not familiar,
we have the baby boomers.
I got the breakdown of, you'll hear different names for generations, different years for generations. Like there's a lot of different information out there, but here's what the resources that we've pulled from have said. Boomers were born between 1946 and 1964. Okay. And by the way, baby boomers right now are in sort of their last phase, like this next 10 years, really the last phase of leadership before most of them will be retired out. Then you've got Gen Xers. That's you and me.
Yep.
Those are 1965 to 1976. By the way, best generation ever. That's funny. Generation, by the way, we Generation X, you think about some of the major distinctions. We really did. When we were in high school, we used to actually have to drive around to find each other.
I had a smoking section it was for lunch. You could go outside out the double doors and stand in an area where if you had a smoking section stamp on your ID, you could go outside and smoke.
In your high school?
In high school, yeah.
Oh my God.
You could smoke.
Okay, so that's a little bit about Gen X.
Yeah, all right. So
we could have a lot of fun with that one. But Generation Y is also known as millennials. So if there's any confusion there, because sometimes I was like, well, which one's Y and which one's millennials? That's the same generation. That is 1977 to 1995. And then this most recent generation is most commonly known as Generation Z. There's a couple of different names that
globals.
Well, I've heard globals. I've also heard centennials.
Yep.
But right now, Generation Z is probably the most commonly used term. That's 1996 until whoever the smart people who research this decide that there's going to be a new generation.
Okay, so now that you know what generation you fall into, what bucket of generations that you fall in, and I think it's interesting too now that we hear so much about, are they a Generation X, or are they a baby boomer? Are they a millennial? Are they a centennial? And like we dicing these people up. Meanwhile, like in the rest of the world, everybody's trying to, not stereotype, not generalize. Like that's supposed to be like the PC thing to do now, is to not generalize, not try to stereotype anybody. But meanwhile, everybody wants to stereotype a millennial for this type of person. And I
okay, so if I feel strongly about one thing, that's what I feel strongly about, is that we are doing too much generalization of this generation. And we have had personal experience with a number of clients across the board, people who we've worked with in our business, where all of the generalizations just fall short. Okay, so yes, let's just talk about the four things. Let's go back to the article and talk about the 4 pieces of advice that this millennial gives to be a better manager for millennials. Number 1, don't be a boss, be a coach.
Don't be a boss, be a coach. So no matter what generation you fall in right now, imagine yourself when you started off, when you were in your 20s and you started working for a company. Would you prefer to have a boss just talk down to you and tell you what to do, just do this and that's it? Or would you like to get some coaching? How would you like it back when you were coming out of college and going to school? Would you prefer that somebody just boss you around or to coach you?
Well, I don't think coaching was really a thing back when we were younger, but I would have given anything.
People were doing it. They just didn't call it coaching.
They didn't call it coaching. And I've got to tell you, I actually did experience leaders, bosses who were really great about empowering me and asking me questions and asking for my opinion and what do you think, and really, really getting engaged in my work. I loved that. And then I also experienced the other side of it, which is like, throw the document at me and say, do it, and you screwed it up. So I'm going to say great piece of advice. She got it right here. And I also think that spans every generation, right? You need to know when to manage and you need to know when to coach. And most people don't understand the distinction well enough because they maybe haven't studied as much in practical management styles and practical steps to being a great coach. And so I think those get muddled all the time. So anyway, I agree with number 1. And I also say across all generations. Yeah.
Yeah. So what we're talking about today is how would you say business in general has categorized all of these generations. And then now it seems to like the hot topic is that millennials, we have to treat millennials differently from how everybody else was treated because they're a special certain type of person, which I just don't believe. What I believe is that we are looking at them as an individual. These are individuals. This is not a group of people. These are individuals, and each individual. And it's funny because we have Justin on with us right now. We have Justin who lives in the Netherlands, and
he lives in London right now.
Oh, he lives in London, and he's going to intern with us. And he reached out to us. He took the bull by the horns and just was like, listen, I want to come out. I want to be able to work with you. I want to learn about your business. I want to do that. Is that a millennial that's entitled, or is that somebody who's just a total go-getter? That is like, I want to take this opportunity and try and learn on my own. It's a lot of it is because of his behavioral style. Mm-hmm. His behavioral style is that he is somebody that's a risk taker. Mm-hmm. He's somebody that is a problem solver, somebody that's going to put themselves on the limb. Then there's other people that we know that are completely the opposite of the behavioral style, millennial though, and we would say that, and they're not necessarily going after, more of a follower. There's somebody who is wants to kind of,
someone who avoids conflict.
Yeah.
Someone who does not take the initiative, is not necessarily independently driven to take initiative. So what's really interesting is, I think, the mistakes that we make in managing at times is that when somebody doesn't do something, or when there's a mistake that's made, some managers are too quick to jump to blaming it on a millennial, a generational issue, versus really truly understanding who the individual is, what makes them tick, right?
Have you ever met an entitled person from the baby boomers generation?
Yep.
How about from Generation X?
Yep.
How about the fact that everybody now, because we have our smartphones in our pockets and in our hands, that we want instant gratification? Is that a generational thing, or is that just a human behavior?
That could be
now?
a now thing. That's could just be a now thing across the board.
Oh, and
right?
by the way, like, don't we all have access to Google Assistant and Siri to be able to get any information that we want all the time?
Mm-hmm.
Aren't we all on social media for the most part? Like,
mm-hmm.
I mean, even though we may be on Facebook more than a millennial would be, they're on just different ones, but we spend a lot of time on it as well.
Mm-hmm.
So what's so different about the generations, and why are they picking on millennials?
Look, I think it's critical that we understand the differences in how they grew up, for sure. Things are different, right? I'm not saying don't study that and don't listen to some of the experts out there who have really, really taken the time to understand the generation. That's just one piece, though. I mean, when you're leading anyone, if you don't understand who they are at their core and what makes them tick, and what really makes up the strengths that they have as a unique individual, unique human being,
what motivates them?
Don't just put them in a bucket. That's my point. So let's go back to number 2. Okay, so number 2, we're talking about an article that was recently written by a millennial, giving 4 tips to how to better manage millennials. Tip number 2, which is again spot on: set your values and live by them. You think that's a good tip?
Yeah. Like, if you're a company, know what you stand for.
Yeah.
Like,
and why
doesn't everybody want to know that?
Tip unique to a millennial? So again, set your values and live by them is absolutely critical as a leader, that you know what you stand for, you know what the company stands for, and you use that sort of as your guardrails for how you behave and the decisions you make and how you show up for your employees, for your customers. That's not specific to millennials. I think that's just good advice overall, correct? But what we hear about millennials is, well, they really want meaningful work. Okay. I don't know.
Who wanted to work somewhere
I don't know anybody
where their job wasn't meaningful.
Who doesn't want to connect to meaningful work. I really don't. We just had this conversation over the weekend with a bunch of people our age, and they all were seeking meaning in life, which is not unique or different. We're hearing about it more now, maybe because maybe when we were younger, we didn't talk about it as much. But anyway, great idea. Set values and live by them. Number 3, create opportunities for development.
So millennials are the only ones that want to have a development plan created for them when they go to work, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or do you think all generations want
wanted to stink and run the place when I was in my 20s. So
I remember working for this guy in the 90s, and I was like, I was literally asking him when he was going to retire and give his business to me. I was a totally entitled Generation Xer, thinking that I was smarter than him, that he was kind of doing it wrong, you know?
I know. I'm embarrassed. I am full on embarrassed at how I used to think and how smart I thought I was and how much I thought I saw that other people didn't see who were running the place. It's embarrassing. I was bad. And the thing is, you probably didn't say it out loud. I probably did, right? Or I just quit and moved on to the next job. Oh, but that's right. Millennials are not loyal. I must have had...
How many jobs did you have?
I want to say I had 16 jobs by the time I was out of law school because I was not big on sticking it out, right? I wanted to learn this and then move on and learn this and move on. Now, to be fair, I worked for a temporary agency as one of my longest held jobs during college, which allowed me to go to all these different jobs. But, I wanted the variety. I didn't want to stay any place too long.
And there's no doubt, the baby boomer generation, they did because actually companies did want to take care of them. They were very loyal to their employees.
But they had pensions back then.
Yeah.
Like, there was a reason that our boomer generation was so stinking loyal.
Right.
You actually got paid for the rest of your life in retirement if you stuck with a company. And then that somehow went away as we were growing older.
Right. And then when you could, in our generation, you were able to start transferring your 401k. So it didn't matter that you left the job if you thought there was a better opportunity, more money to make. You could just take your 401k and bring it with you instead of having this pension that was attached to the company on the years that you were there. I mean, so that changed as well. And that made a huge difference in how people.
Massive difference. Yeah. And you think about, the biggest difference, and especially for our generation, I think this is a true generational gap, is we watched our parents work for these companies, and the companies then took care of them, a lot of them in retirement. And then we may not have taken as much initiative because maybe we weren't taught that we needed to, for setting up our retirement and being really intentional about taking personal responsibility for that retirement income. So I know, we made a lot of mistakes early on, and we had a lot of catch up to do.
Right. But so we're getting back to that. The millennials are the ones that just want to leave their job. They're only going to stick around for a year or two. And it's probably true, but maybe other generations last a little bit longer, but that's just the times. That's just how it is right now. There's more opportunity that people are understanding that you want to learn. You can learn a lot more from different companies than you can from just one in a lot of cases. And if they are not creating opportunities for development, if you are not trying to develop your employees, why would they stick around?
Well, and it's not just the millennials that'll leave. I promise you, top performers will leave if you're not creating that development plan.
Yeah.
So again, we're talking about millennials. We're talking about some of these generational issues, but more importantly, generational generalizations, which is where we get in trouble as leaders. I want to make sure that we're very clear that when it comes to leading, Paul and I both feel very, very strongly that it's not just about putting people in a certain bucket of what generation they're from and making an excuse for why something didn't get done, or why something was done wrong, or why somebody left your employment, for that matter. There was a note in this article that the number one reason that millennials leave jobs is because of bad managers. Well,
so ask yourself, if you have a bad manager, wouldn't you consider leaving too?
Yeah. And so again, I think that should be turned around to the leader, where the leader looks at themselves. And if you're losing employees at a regular rate, don't just blame it on the millennials. Take a look at yourself and say, how am I doing as a boss? How am I doing as a leader? Am I a great coaching leader for these people? Am I getting so into understanding my employees that I know their individual strengths and I am tapping into them? And do I understand their limitations? And am I helping them move past those limitations so that they can get more intentional about tapping into their strengths? Because if I'm not focused on developing them, yes, they're going to leave, but I don't think they're unique in that.
No.
I leave too.
Everyone.
We all want to be developed.
Here's a tip. Everyone wants to be developed. Everyone. Nobody wants to sit at their job and have no meaning to it, and have nobody have their back and say, that we're not interested in growing you. We just want you to continue doing the same job over and over and over. We're not working on production lines for the most part anymore. Mm-hmm. People are doing jobs where they should have the opportunity to develop and see what's available for them, but also, it's the person's responsibility as well to learn more, take on personal development for themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. So we all want growth. And, so I totally recognize now that it is up to each of us individually to grow and develop ourselves and make sure that we're in a growth environment. But I didn't know that when I was younger either. No. I thought it was up to my boss, up to my job to develop me. So, you know what? Let's just make the assumption that not everybody at a young age takes their own personal responsibility for their growth and development. So let's create that platform for them. Let's make sure that we have a system that's set up to help people grow and develop in their career path. Because if we don't, they're gone. Guaranteed.
Okay, let me ask you, out of all the generations, so we talked about the baby boomers, mm-hmm. Generation X, millennials, and then the Generation Z, or the globals, or the centennials. Is that what it is?
Yeah. Generation Z.
Okay, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
In the workplace, would all generations, or would just one particular one like more communication than the other?
Is that a trick question?
No.
Yeah. So number 4 tip that this author gives us in the article is communicate, communicate, communicate. That her generation is used to instant communication. Agreed. Agreed. Again, I have no issue with this article. It is spot on. What I have an issue with is thinking that this is a different strategy for millennials than it is for the other generations. And the answer is we all need communication. And one of the biggest challenges that people have in the workplace is this lack of communication. And usually it's because most people will avoid conflict. So they'll communicate about the nicey nice stuff, but they won't have the direct conversations that are the meaningful conversations that are the needed conversations to develop someone. It all kind of flows together. And so I think that that's missing, full stop.
Well, and not to mention, annual reviews. Like seriously, annual reviews, like that's the only time that you're going to talk to and give feedback to your employee.
That was a system that was created to basically put a Band-Aid on the fact that people were unwilling and unable to have direct conversations in a relevant and timely and meaningful way. It's, I think, like they're going by the way of the dodo bird. Because it doesn't work. It doesn't work to one time per year have the sit down and say, hey, Paul, we're going to have a conversation about your work. And let's see, I have a note here that last April 2018, do you remember when you did that project? Well, you didn't do it right. And I know we didn't talk about it then, but I just want to bring that up.
Why didn't you tell me back in April?
Well, it was an annual review time, so I'm sharing that information with you now. And what I've done is instead of giving you an exceeds expectations, I gave you a meets expectations, and that was really the one you screwed up.
Well, I wish you would have told me back then.
I know, right? How many of you have been on the receiving end of that? So, I don't mind annual reviews. I actually love the fact that there's a formal process in place. But I think most people aren't actually using the process the right way, and they're waiting the entire year to give feedback. They're not giving relevant, timely feedback, and it's just killing people because they sit down for these annual reviews. Everybody gets all stressed out before the annual review comes, including the managers. Good Lord, they have to do all these reviews in a finite amount of time. It's just nuts. So we are talking about managing millennials, and we are really looking at the mistake that I think is made too often is treating this group of people differently because of their age. Most importantly, making excuses for things like why they quit or why they're not performing or why something's not working. And I think as leaders, we should take a higher level of responsibility. We should look in the mirror. And when we've got issues with a human being, let's take into consideration not only their generation, but let's go a little bit deeper. Let's talk about their strengths. Let's look at who they are as human beings. Let's take a look at their values, and let's have those direct and meaningful conversations. Let's develop them. Let's communicate. It's across the board. It's every generation needs this kind of advice, right?
Yeah, I'm totally on board. And I think I've always had somewhat of an issue with just putting everybody in buckets and just making, I think it's every generation looks at the next generation and finds things that, that's wrong with them.
Different.
And I think the reason that it's so dramatic right now is because of, the fact that it's only 10 years ago that we got smartphones, that we literally have smartphones. I mean, so, it's made a big difference. It's changed dramatically. And the baby boomers who are still in leadership roles in some of the, in government organizations and some other types of industries, they're struggling with younger people, which I think has always happened throughout the years.
Yeah.
And so things happen. I mean, technology has been changing forever. I mean, there's the horse and buggy, and then there were cars, and then there were TVs, and then there were, radio. It was all of these things have happened that have changed it with the generations. And I think it's more important to look at the person as an individual, look at what motivates them, look at how their behavioral style is. And it also then ask them, if you really want to ask somebody, and this goes across the board, they always talk about it for millennials, ask them what their why is. What drives them? You know what? Ask me what my why is. I want to tell you. I'll tell you what everybody who's employed wants to serve for a purpose for the most part. in general, most people are
Everyone
wanting
wants
to
to
do
serve.
something and feel good about the job
Mhm.
that they're doing. Everybody wants to find their passion and be in a job that makes them. But the difference is that some people, because of their behavioral styles and motivators, will not take action and move on. They will stay in one place. They'll do it the same thing over and over, and they may complain about it a lot. Whereas other people who have more risk tolerant behavioral styles will go job hopping from job to job to job because they're looking for a different opportunity or somebody to buy into them, to help them develop, to help them, to lead them. Everybody who's young is looking to be led by somebody strong. Everybody wants a leader.
Well, thank
And that's
you.
my 2 cents on it.
Thank you for your 2 cents. Thanks, everybody, for tuning in. We'd love to hear your thoughts on millennials. And do you see a massive difference? Do you see that there are people around you who are, overgeneralizing and putting people into categories and maybe taking less of a personal responsibility for leadership because they can blame too many things on generational issues? We stand for stepping up and being a strong leader and leading every individual for exactly who they are, including their differences in generation, behavioral styles, motivators, strengths, limitations, and everything else that goes along with it. So if you liked this episode, please share it. And if you haven't connected with us, please go to heatherchristie.com, or you can check us out on our YouTube channel. Please subscribe and you'll get our updated videos with some tips on success, business, leadership in general.
Thanks, Heather. And thanks for watching and have a great day.